welcome to our deep dive into the selfish gene.
Oh, yeah.
Now, you might already know that this book by Richard Dawkins
Yeah.
is a revolutionary look at evolution.
Mm-hmm.
But what makes it truly special is its perspective.
Okay.
Instead of focusing on the individual or the species,
Right.
Dawkins wants us to see the world through the eyes of something much smaller,
Uh-huh.
the gene.
Interesting.
Don't worry.
Yeah.
He's a fantastic writer.
I've heard that. Yeah.
He makes even complex science engaging and relatable.
That's what's so brilliant about Dawkins. He starts with a deceptively simple question.
Okay.
Why are people?
Mm-hmm.
But the answer, he argues, lies in understanding evolution
Okay.
from this unique gene's eye view.
Okay. I'm intrigued,
Yeah.
but what does it actually mean
Right.
to look at evolution through the eyes of a gene?
Imagine you could zoom in on the very building blocks of life.
Okay.
Dawkins argues that natural selection, the
Yeah.
process that drives evolution, doesn't favor individuals or even entire species.
Mhm.
Instead, it acts at the level of the gene.
Okay.
This means that genes are essentially in a constant competition to replicate and survive across generations.
Right.
They're what Dawkins calls selfish.
Mm-hmm.
Their main goal is to make more copies of themselves.
So if I'm following you,
Yeah.
you're saying that we're basically just vehicles
Mm-hmm.
for these selfish genes to travel through time.
It's a profound shift in perspective.
Yeah, that's both fascinating and kind of a scary thought.
We often think of ourselves as the main characters in the story of life,
Right.
but Dawkins argues that we're more like the cars our genes are driving.
Yeah.
He even calls us survival machines,
Okay.
built and maintained by our genes
Wow.
to ensure their own perpetuation.
Okay, that's a powerful image.
Yeah.
But how does this whole gene's eye view explain things like altruism?
Right.
Acts of selflessness,
Mhm.
where individuals seem to put others' needs before their own. That doesn't sound very selfish to me.
You've hit on one of the most counterintuitive
Yeah.
yet brilliant aspects of Dawkins' theory.
Okay.
He tackles this head-on with the concept of kin selection.
Um.
Think about a mother bear fiercely protecting her cubs.
Mm-hmm.
It seems selfless, right?
Yeah, I guess.
But from the gene's perspective,
Sure.
it's all about protecting copies of itself.
I'm starting to see where you're going with this, because
Mhm.
the mother shares genes with her cubs.
Exactly.
Her protective behavior,
Yes.
while risky,
Uh-huh.
actually increases the chances
Right.
that those genes will survive and be passed on.
Exactly. It's not that the mother bear is consciously thinking about her genes,
Right.
but through evolution.
Mm.
Those genes that predisposed individuals to protect their kin
Mm-hmm.
were more likely to survive
Okay.
because their relatives, who likely carry those same genes,
Mm-hmm.
were more likely to survive and reproduce.
So even seemingly selfless acts can be explained by this underlying drive of genes to perpetuate themselves.
Yeah.
That's a pretty wild way to look at it.
And it leads us to another fascinating question that Dawkins explores. Why sex?
Oh, yeah.
Why bother with this whole complicated process of mixing genes
Okay.
when organisms could just clone themselves and pass on all of their genes directly?
Good point. Cloning seems much more efficient.
Yeah.
So what's the evolutionary advantage of mixing things up through sexual reproduction?
Dawkins argues that the key lies in diversity and adaptability.
Okay.
Think about it.
Okay.
A world of clones would be very vulnerable
Mm-hmm.
to sudden environmental changes or diseases.
Right.
But when genes are mixed through sexual reproduction,
Yeah.
it creates variation in the offspring,
Okay.
and that variation increases the odds
Uh-huh.
that at least some individuals will have the traits needed to survive and reproduce
Gotcha.
in a changing world.
So it's like shuffling a deck of cards by
Yeah.
constantly mixing things up.
Right.
You increase the chances of having the right hand to win,
Exactly.
no matter what the game throws at you.
That's a great analogy.
Ex-
And within this game of sexual reproduction,
yeah.
Dawkins highlights another fascinating layer of conflict and strategy,
Okay.
the battle of the sexes.
Ooh.
He points out that males and females
Yeah.
often have different reproductive strategies,
Yeah.
each aiming to maximize their own genetic success.
Right. He talks about things like the domestic bliss strategy,
Yes.
where a male invests heavily in caring for his offspring, and the He-Man strategy,
Yeah,
where a male focuses on mating with as many females as possible.
exactly. These strategies and the behaviors they lead to
Okay.
reflect the underlying push and pull between male and female genes,
Yeah.
each striving to outcompete the others
Right.
and secure their place in future generations.
This is getting incredibly complex.
Yeah.
But it also helps explain why we see so much diversity and even conflict in the mating behaviors of different species.
And this complexity only deepens as we move into the realm of social interactions.
Okay.
Dawkins uses game theory,
Okay.
specifically the prisoner's dilemma, to understand how cooperation can evolve, even in a world driven by selfish genes.
Wait, hold on.
Yeah.
How can something like cooperation,
Right.
which seems so selfless,
Yeah.
emerge from individuals acting in their own self-interest? That seems contradictory.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But the surprising insight from game theory
Okay.
is that cooperation can sometimes be the most advantageous strategy,
Okay.
even for individuals driven by selfish motives. Imagine two individuals who are repeatedly interacting with each other,
Okay.
much like animals in a social group,
Right.
or even humans in a community.
Okay, I'm picturing this repeated interaction.
Yeah.
What happens next?
Dawkins highlights a strategy called tit for tat.
Oh.
It's incredibly simple. You cooperate on your first move,
Yeah.
and then you just mirror your opponent's previous move. If they cooperate, you cooperate.
Right.
If they cheat, you cheat.
So it's like a you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours
Yeah,
approach.
exactly.
But with consequences if someone tries to take advantage.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is that this simple strategy,
Yeah.
when played out over multiple rounds, often leads to the most stable and beneficial outcome for both players.
It sounds almost too simple to be true.
It does.
But I guess that's the elegance of evolutionary solutions.
Yes, precisely.
Yeah.
And Dawkins connects this back to the natural world,
Okay.
showing how tit for tat can explain things like reciprocal altruism and vampire bats.
Vampire bats.
Right.
Those creepy creatures that suck blood.
Yes, but they also exhibit a fascinating form of cooperation.
Okay.
If a bat has a successful night of feeding,
Yeah.
it will often share some of its blood with a bat that was unsuccessful, with the expectation of receiving similar help in the future.
So even in the dark world of vampire bats,
Yeah.
there's this underlying logic of cooperation,
Exactly.
nothing by self-interest.
And this brings us to one of the most mind-bending concepts in the selfish gene,
Okay.
the extended phenotype.
Ooh.
It's an idea that truly challenges our traditional view of
Yeah.
where genes end and the organism begins.
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay.
Lay it on me.
All right.
What is this extended phenotype all about?
Think about a beaver building a dam. The dam itself isn't part of the beaver's body, but it's built according to instructions encoded in the beaver's genes. Dawkins argues that these extended creations, these impacts on the environment, are just as much a product of the beaver's genes as its teeth or its tail.
So it's like saying a spider web is part of the spider's genes, even though it's outside of its body.
Precisely. Dawkins suggests that we need to broaden our understanding of what a gene can do. Its influence can extend beyond the individual organism to shape the world around it. And this leads us to even more fascinating examples, like parasites that manipulate their host's behavior to benefit their own survival.
Wow, that's kind of creepy, but also incredibly clever.
Hmm.
Can you give me an example?
Imagine a parasitic worm that infects a snail. This worm needs the snail to be eaten by a bird to complete its life cycle. So what does it do? It manipulates the snail's behavior, making it climb to the top of a plant stem, where it's more likely to be seen and eaten by a bird.
So the worm's genes are essentially controlling the snail's actions to benefit the worm's own survival. That's like something out of a science fiction movie.
It is, but this is the power of the extended phenotype concept. It shows us that genes can have far-reaching effects, influencing not just the traits of an individual organism, but also its interactions with the environment and even the behavior of other organisms.
Okay, my mind is officially blown. But before we go any further, I have to ask, if genes are inherently selfish, does that mean we are too? Are we all just walking, talking survival machines programmed to spread our genes?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's one that Dawkins grapples with throughout The Selfish Gene. He acknowledges the powerful influence of our genes, but he also suggests that we, as humans, have a unique capacity to rebel against their dictates.
So you're saying there's hope for us. We're not just slaves to our DNA.
Think about it this way. We have the ability to understand the forces that have shaped us, to reflect on our own behavior, and to make conscious choices. We can choose to act altruistically towards those who are not our kin. We can choose to have fewer children, even though our genes might be urging us to have more.
That's incredibly empowering. It means we're not just passengers on this genetic roller coaster. We can actually grab the wheel and steer our own course, at least to some extent.
And this brings us to another fascinating aspect of human behavior that Dawkins explores our capacity for aggression. Now, you might think that aggression, with its potential for conflict and harm, is the antithesis of cooperation. But Dawkins argues that aggression, too, can be understood as a strategy that ultimately benefits gene survival.
I'm listening. How does that work?
Think about the competition for resources, whether it's food, territory, or mates. Individuals often have to compete to secure what they need to survive and reproduce. And aggression, in many cases, is a tool in that competition.
But doesn't constant aggression just lead to chaos and instability?
That's where the concept of the evolutionarily stable strategy, or ESS, comes into play. Dawkins draws on the work of John Maynard Smith, who used game theory to understand how different behavioral strategies could evolve and coexist within a population.
So it's like a game of strategy, but with survival and reproduction as the ultimate prizes.
Exactly. Dawkins uses the classic example of the hawk and dove strategies. Hawks are always aggressive, ready to fight for what they want. Doves, on the other hand, are more passive, preferring to avoid conflict.
I'm guessing being a hawk all the time isn't the best strategy.
You're right. In a world of all hawks, there would be constant fighting, with a lot of individuals getting injured or killed. And that would ultimately reduce the overall success of the group. What Maynard Smith found was that the most stable strategy often involves a mix of hawks and doves, a balance between aggression and restraint.
So it's about finding the right balance between competition and cooperation, even when it comes to something as seemingly primal as aggression.
Yes. And this balance can apply to a wide range of social interactions. Dawkins explores how the ESS concept can help us understand things like territoriality, dominance hierarchies, and even the evolution of altruism.
Speaking of altruism, I'm reminded of those gazelles that Dawkins talks about, the ones that jump up and down when they see a predator. That doesn't seem very helpful for survival. It's like they're asking to be eaten.
It does seem counterintuitive, doesn't it? But this behavior, called stotting, has fascinated biologists for years. Dawkins discusses a theory that suggests stotting is actually a way for gazelles to signal their fitness to the predator.
So it's like they're saying, look at me. I'm so strong and healthy that I can afford to waste energy jumping around. You'll never catch me.
Exactly. It's a way of saying, I'm not worth chasing. And this honest signal might actually deter the predator from pursuing a chase that's unlikely to be successful.
That's amazing. It shows that even seemingly self-destructive behavior can have an underlying evolutionary logic.
And this leads us to another intriguing question. Why do animals, including humans, live in groups? On the one hand, there's safety in numbers. But on the other hand, there's increased competition for resources.
Right, so what's the evolutionary advantage?
Dawkins explores a variety of explanations for group living, and one particularly fascinating example is alarm calls in birds. You know, when a bird sees a predator and lets out a warning cry, alerting the rest of the flock.
But doesn't that put the caller at risk? It seems pretty selfless, even heroic.
It does, but Dawkins suggests that there might be selfish benefits to giving alarm calls, even if those seem counterintuitive. One theory is that the caller is actually reducing its own risk by making the whole flock freeze.
I see. If everyone is still and quiet, the predator is less likely to spot any of them, including the bird that gave the alarm.
Precisely. It's self-preservation through collective action. And this highlights a recurring theme in the selfish gene, how even seemingly selfless acts can often be traced back to an underlying logic of self-interest.
Okay, so we've talked about aggression, cooperation, and group living. But what about the ultimate act of self-sacrifice, suicide? Does the selfish gene theory have anything to say about that? It's hard to imagine how giving up your own life could ever benefit your genes. It seems like the ultimate evolutionary dead end.
It does, doesn't it? But as with so many things in the selfish gene, Dawkins challenges our assumptions and shows us that even suicide can be viewed through the lens of gene survival, particularly when we look at the fascinating world of social insects.
Okay, I'm thinking about bees or ants. Their colonies are incredibly complex and cooperative. But how does suicide fit into that?
Think about worker bees who sacrifice their lives to defend the hive. They sting intruders, knowing that the stinger will be ripped from their body, killing them in the process. From an individual perspective, it's a truly selfless act. But when we shift our perspective to the gene's eye view, it starts to make a different kind of sense.
I am all ears. How can a behavior that leads to death be beneficial for a gene?
Well, remember that worker bees are sterile. They don't reproduce themselves. Instead, their entire lives are devoted to caring for the queen and her offspring.
Ah, so by protecting the hive, they're indirectly protecting their genetic
So
relatives.
precisely, and here's where it gets really interesting. Because of the unique genetics of social insects, worker bees are actually more closely related to their sisters than they would be to their own offspring.
Wait, hold on. How is that possible? It seems counterintuitive.
It has to do with the way sex determination works in bees. Males develop from unfertilized eggs and have only one set of chromosomes, while females develop from fertilized eggs and have two sets. This means that sisters share a greater proportion of their genes with each other than they would with their own offspring.
Wow, that's mind-blowing. So from the perspective of the genes, sacrificing oneself to protect the hive with all its sisters is a pretty good strategy.
Exactly. It might seem like a paradox. But even suicide in this context can be understood as a way for genes to maximize their chances of survival across generations.
It makes you realize just how much our assumptions about behavior are shaped by our human perspective. When we
Yeah.
look at the world through the gene's eye view, things that seemed illogical suddenly start to make sense.
That's the power of the selfish gene. It forces us to step outside of our usual frame of reference and consider the underlying evolutionary forces that have shaped not only our bodies but also our behavior.
So we've covered aggression, cooperation, altruism, even suicide. But there's one aspect of human behavior we haven't touched on yet, and it's a big one: love. Where does love fit into this world of selfish genes?
That's a great question, and Dawkins doesn't shy away from it. He argues that love, particularly parental love, can also be seen as a strategy for maximizing gene survival.
I can see that parental care, which is often driven by love, is essential for the survival of offspring in many species.
Hmm.
But how does the selfish gene idea explain the complex dynamics within families? I mean,
Right.
wouldn't a parent's genes benefit most from spreading their resources equally among all their children?
You've hit upon another fascinating area of conflict and compromise. While parents might strive for fairness, from the perspective of each individual offspring, it's in their best interest to try and secure a bit more than their fair share of parental investment.
Ah, so it's sibling rivalry, but playing out on an evolutionary timescale.
Precisely. Each offspring is 100% related to itself, but only 50% related to its siblings. So from a gene's perspective, it makes sense for an individual to try and maximize the resources it receives, even if it means its siblings get slightly less.
So how does this play out in the real world? Does this mean families are destined to be battlegrounds of constant conflict between siblings?
Not necessarily. Natural selection would favor strategies that strike a balance between individual self-interest and the well-being of the family unit. After all, if siblings were constantly sabotaging each other, it could reduce the chances of any of them surviving and reproducing.
So it's like a delicate dance between competition and cooperation, even within the family.
Exactly. And this dance can be influenced by various factors: the availability of resources, the age and health of the offspring, even the likelihood of future reproduction. Dawkins delves into all of these complexities, looking at things like weaning conflicts, sibling rivalry, and even the evolution of menopause.
It makes you appreciate just how intricate and fascinating family dynamics really are. But throughout our deep dive today, we've mostly focused on biological evolution. Didn't Dawkins also have some revolutionary things to say about cultural evolution?
Absolutely. And this is where we come to perhaps the most enduring and influential concept in the selfish gene, the concept of memes.
Ah, memes. Now, those are something I'm familiar with. They're everywhere these days. Funny images, catchy songs, viral challenges. But if I remember correctly, Dawkins coined the term meme long before the internet as we know it existed.
That's right. He used meme to describe units of cultural information ideas, beliefs, behaviors that spread from person to person through imitation.
So he was essentially saying that ideas can evolve in a similar way to genes. That's a pretty radical idea.
It is. Just as genes compete for survival in the gene pool, Dawkins argued that memes compete for attention and replication in what he called the meme pool, the world of culture.
So a successful meme is one that spreads widely and persists, kind of like a viral video.
Exactly. And just like genes, memes can be selfish in their drive to replicate. They don't necessarily have to be beneficial or even make sense to us. They just need to be good at spreading.
That's a bit unsettling, isn't it? It's like our minds can be infected by ideas, even if those ideas aren't good for us.
It's a thought-provoking concept, but it helps explain why some ideas, even harmful ones, can spread so rapidly and stick around for so long. Think about conspiracy theories or unfounded beliefs that persist for centuries.
You're right, they may not be based in reality, but they're very effective at replicating themselves and jumping from mind to mind.
And Dawkins suggested that understanding the principles of memetics, the study of memes, could help us understand the evolution of culture itself, from fashion trends and musical tastes to religious movements and political ideologies.
Wow, so we're not just products of our genes, we're also products of the memes that have shaped our culture. It's quite a profound realization.
It is, and Dawkins argued that this dual inheritance, genetic and cultural, has huge implications for how we understand ourselves and the future of our species.
This has been an incredible journey through the selfish gene. It's challenged my assumptions, expanded my understanding of evolution, and left me with a whole new set of questions to ponder.
That's the beauty of Dawkins' work. It's not just about the answers it provides, but the way it makes us think. What we've learned today is not just about biology or culture, it's about understanding the fundamental forces, replication competition, and cooperation that shape our world at every level.
So the question Dawkins leaves us with is, can we use this knowledge to create a better future for ourselves and our planet? Or are we destined to be, as he put it, lumbering robots, driven by the selfish dictates of our genes and memes?
That's the challenge for all of us, and as you continue to explore and learn, keep these ideas in mind. Because in the end, the most important takeaway from the selfish gene isn't just the knowledge it imparts, but the way it transforms our understanding of the world and our place in it.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the selfish gene. We hope it sparked your curiosity and given you a new perspective on the intricate web of life. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those minds engaged.